Before we get into the most iconic SEAL Team 6 mission, we want to thank this video's sponsor, Conflict of Nations World War III. Conflict of Nations is a free-to-play online strategy game where you lead a real country through World War III. You can choose to forge alliances with other nations or expand your territory through brute force. Unlike the covert raids in this documentary, you'll be fighting out in the open with tanks, jets and nuclear submarines against up to 128 other players in real-time battles that can last for weeks. Not only that, you can play on PC or mobile with the same account. So, if you love strategy games, you can claim a very special offer for Wonder viewers. Click the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. But hurry, this offer is only available for the next 30 days. Now, on to the documentary.
A vicious militant is systematically targeting innocent civilians.
The guy was so brutal. If you kill everybody else, eventually people stand back and say, whoa, we got a big guy.
An elite group of special forces are hand-picked from across the world to take the terrorists out.
You do a series of raids that is devastating.
They are led by a maverick general with radical new methods.
If you hit an organization repeatedly enough, you could actually cause them to collapse.
It's a race against time. They must stop him before more blood is shed.
Nothing's routine if there's lives at risk.
Iraq, April 2006. In the dead of night, a helicopter lifts off from a desert airbase. On board is a group of elite soldiers from a secretive unit, codenamed Task Force Black.
On the way to a mission, I'm often asked, were you nervous? You know, I have time to be nervous because there's so many things happening. I mean, everyone is busy.
They are bound for a house in an area known as the Triangle of Death. Their mission is to arrest a senior member of the deadly terror group, Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
You should always be expecting the worst. What if we get fire upon? What if the fast rope is in the wrong spot? What if we get around and the helicopter is downed outside the compound?
Their targets are ready to resist with extreme violence.
Almost as soon as they were through the door, they were hit by a hail of bullets. The people inside clearly knew somebody was coming, they were armed and they were waiting.
The team quickly kill the first militant and move in to clear the rest of the building.
There were half a dozen assault rifles. There were dozens of hand grenades. There were at least 2, possibly 3, wearing suicide vests.
And at the top of the staircase, one of the suicide bombers steps out of the shadows and detonates his vest. By now, the militants are fighting with everything they have. 2 more appear on the roof and spray the assault force with bullets. The soldiers of Task Force Black are accustomed to this kind of brutal violence. They face it on a daily basis.
At the end of the day, we're going to win, and we'll do whatever it takes to win.
Though the Special Forces don't realize it, this house holds the key to finding the most wanted man in the Middle East. One of their captives tonight will lead them to Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. He has murdered thousands of innocent civilians and spread terror throughout the region. His campaign of violence is so effective, the US has created a Black Ops task force with just one mission: taking al-Zarqawi down.
This was a guy who had murdered thousands of people. In fact, he murdered many more people than Osama Bin Laden ever did.
To understand how al-Zarqawi rose to become one of the most feared terrorists on the planet, we must look to the town of Zarqa, Jordan, 500 miles to the west of Baghdad. Al-Zarqawi was born here in 1966.
Zarqawi's background is he was a criminal. You know, he spent time in a Jordanian prison for sexual assault. He was a drug dealer. He was a petty criminal in Jordan.
Accounts differ as to whether he was actually a sort of hard boozing villain in his hometown. But it's certainly true that he was involved in some forms of crime and that he probably had some kind of epiphany, some kind of moment when he realized that his life was going the wrong way and that Islam was the answer for him.
In 1989, al-Zarqawi travels to Afghanistan to become a freedom fighter against the Soviet occupation. It is here that he meets his mentor and inspiration, Osama bin Laden.
He had come up during the course of the war in Afghanistan. People understood his importance as an operational leader, and he was clearly trusted by bin Laden and the al-Qaeda senior leadership. He was well-liked by the soldiers in al-Qaeda. He was well-respected by the leadership. He was incredibly capable. He was experienced.
Over the next 15 years, partly with bin Laden's support, al-Zarqawi grows to become an accomplished terrorist. By 2003, he is in Iraq, fighting against the American-led invasion. The early months of the war appear to be a swift and stunning victory as the old regime melts away. But al-Zarqawi is waiting in the shadows to start a new campaign of violence.
When he was deployed into Iraq, we understood as the American counterterrorism community that this was a significant event. He had that unique combination of skills that would allow him to be a real force for al-Qaeda against us inside Iraq.
In the months that follow Saddam's overthrow, chaos envelops the country. Al-Zarqawi takes full advantage of this, actively working to stir up the hatred between Iraq's two main religious groups, the majority Shia Muslims and the minority Sunnis. He creates a militant group with the aim of killing as many Shias as possible, thus sparking retaliations and creating a brutal cycle of violence. It is called Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI.
We mistakenly look at these organizations as terrorist groups. This is too narrow. These are revolutionary organizations that want to spread an idea. They don't want to just spread weapons or explode suicide. The idea is they can return to what they call a caliphate, a 14 centuries old concept that there's a purer way to live according to the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad. So the idea is, where can you find a springboard to do this? Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then you get Iraq.
The militant Islamists were prepared to do pretty much anything. And of course, quite soon they discovered that bombing things like the UN offices in Baghdad, the International Committee of the Red Cross offices, and then moving on to targets like markets, queues outside police stations where the police were recruiting, all those sort of things, were actually far easier targets than American convoys or American bases, where the T-walls had gone up. The base represented a hard, concrete face to the world. And, you know, yes, if you drove a truck up, you might kill the guy on the gate who was checking passes, but you were unlikely to achieve a major result.
Al-Zarqawi orchestrates numerous suicide bombings. A devastating series of attacks in March 2004 kills close to 200 people at Shia holy sites.
So they shifted their targeting towards the sort of softer targets that could yield more spectacular results. And of course, soon they were killing dozens, scores, maybe even sometimes over 100 people in a single complex attack.
On the 11th of May 2004, Al-Zarqawi is linked to a new outrage. A video of an American hostage appears on a jihadist website. The American, deliberately dressed in a Guantanamo Bay-style orange jumpsuit, is Nick Berg, a 26-year-old communications engineer from Pennsylvania. Berg was kidnapped in Iraq a month previously, and the video shows his unimaginably horrific death.
The video is one of those horror show type of jihadist videos in which a long knife is used to cut his throat. And you can even hear the sound of knife on bone and the screams. It's a truly horrific video. But the point is, at the beginning of the video, in the original form it was released, it says Abu Musab al-Zarqawi slaughters an American.
The CIA determines that al-Zarqawi himself is the hooded man wielding the knife.
The guy was so brutal, so tough. It's sort of like a mafia family operating in New York City. If you kill everybody else, eventually people stand back and say, whoa, we got a big guy, a big dog on the corner in town, and we better be careful.
Zarqawi could see that if he publicized himself and what he was doing as a really militant, irreconcilable enemy of the Americans, that this would bring him money from the collections in mosques for the jihad. It would bring him volunteers from across the Arab world. And in that calculation, he was right.
He really put the crosshairs on his own head by all these spectacular acts and all the press that he was receiving.
So just the brutality and the effectiveness of his efforts against first the Americans and then locals, I think people stood back and say, this guy's a blowtorch. We better let him roll.
What the Iraqi Sunnis started to believe, and those people who had joined al-Qaeda, was that if the Americans can't kill Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, can't stop him, then maybe he was predestined to win the war.
Berg's death is a signal to the world that al-Zarqawi's reign of terror is escalating out of control. But secretly, the US is planning a series of black ops designed to bring him crashing down. In Washington, ending al-Zarqawi's reign of terror has become a top priority for President Bush and his inner circle of advisors.
You come in, and the days where the momentum, you feel like the momentum hasn't been with you, you start with, your thought is really so simple. It's let nothing blow up today. Let me get through today with nothing blowing up.
It wasn't that we were losing, it was just like, when will this end, and how will it end?
Al-Zarqawi seems to have the power to strike at will, and yet somehow he remains completely hidden.
We really didn't know what he was doing in Iraq, and we didn't know, like, did he have wives there? Did he have kids there? Where was he moving? What was his support network?
What most counterterrorism officials will tell you is you go through periods where you feel beleaguered, right? You go through periods where you're making very limited progress and you're trying to understand why that is. Why does he seem to have momentum behind him? And you're trying to figure out, what can I do to change that dynamic? But anybody who's been in this fight will tell you that's what happens. You go through these periods and you've got to push through it. You've got to understand what is it that's giving him the momentum and how do you take that away from him?
No one even has a recent photo of al-Zarqawi, let alone any idea where he is. He doesn't use a mobile phone, for fear it will be tracked. He only meets with a select group of trusted advisors, whose own whereabouts are unknown.
He really was kind of a ghost for a long time. And you would get bits and pieces here, but usually by the time you got them, they were outdated.
In September 2003, a new general arrives in Iraq. His name is Stanley McChrystal. He has radical new ideas for hunting down al-Zarqawi and destroying AQI.
General McChrystal is one of the most dedicated individuals I've ever met. He is a driven warrior. He artfully looked at where he could make the most impact.
Stan McChrystal, unique guy. Years of experience with our Special Operations Forces at all levels, former Ranger commander. You get personalities that are that strong, that experienced, that well respected. The force falls in, and their operational experience starts to show. And it's just the type of guy you want in that position.
McChrystal is the newly appointed commander of the Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC.
And certainly in every conflict, the JSOC has been there. They were in Grenada, they were in Panama, Gulf I, Gulf II, Kosovo. Pretty much where there's a conflict, you can depend that JSOC has been there first, and they're always the last to leave.
Formed in the late 1980s to coordinate the work of America's elite troops, JSOC controls the best of the best from across the US military. These are the so-called Special Mission Units, Navy SEAL Team 6, Army Delta Force, and the Air Force 24th Special Tactics Squadron, active in every corner of the world. Often on highly classified missions, the men of JSOC are experts in precise, targeted strikes against hard-to-reach enemies.
It was a very secret organization, and it was tasked with fighting the most sensitive types of mission against US enemies, obviously, in the context post-9/11, terrorist enemies, counter-terrorism.
At the start of the war, JSOC's mission had been to find and arrest the leaders of the old Iraqi regime, the men famously depicted on a deck of cards, with Saddam Hussein as the ace of spades.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Within a year, even Saddam himself is in custody. But this creates a power vacuum, and al-Zarqawi is ready and waiting to step into the breach.
In decapitating what some call the Ba'athist or nationalist leadership, they probably assisted the growth of al-Qaeda in Iraq, because by taking away the leadership figures, the sheikhs, the former generals, the key people, the key Ba'athists, they left quite a lot of angry, young, militant Sunnis with nowhere to go.
McChrystal takes a strategic decision to abandon the hunt for ex-members of the old Saddam regime. Instead, he will focus almost all of his resources on just one man, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi.
Our commander gave us a big speech. The point of the speech was the only way to win the Iraq War and to stop the violence between Sunni and Shia is to find and kill or capture Abu Musab al-Zarqawi.
To get to al-Zarqawi himself, McChrystal knows he needs to build a complete picture of his terror network, AQI. He sets up a large command center at an old Iraqi airbase in the town of Balad, north of Baghdad. Then he invites all of America's many competing spy agencies to set up camp there. From now on, interagency turf wars are banned, and everything will be shared.
When we started working with Special Forces, and I remember General McChrystal, who's a real hero in this war, I remember him coming into CIA headquarters and saying, you know, we need some of your people. And as any bureaucrat will, you sit back there and say, all right, is this dog going to hunt? What are we trying to do here?
The idea is that every piece of information, however insignificant, will be brought here and fed into a massive database. If McChrystal and his men learn everything they can about AQI, they may be able to quickly find its weakest points and strike.
Senior leadership understood that in order to win a counterinsurgency, you could not win it by being on the defensive. You had to go on the offensive.
You would be shocked at, the focus on the targets. These are the top 10. Here are the intel collection tasks. This is how we're moving against them. And as information breaks on each one, you see the various forces and the interagency and the allies, and in some cases the Iraqis, move against that. And it's an unfolding story every day. It's constantly updated. It never blinks. It never sleeps.
A key part of the plan is to pump each captured militant for as much intelligence as possible. So McChrystal sets up a special detention facility right next door to his command center.
The interrogation unit essentially composed of where we kept the prisoners and also our interrogation rooms, and then our analysis room and our desks, which we called the Gator Pit. Part of our facility was, an old Saddam-era aircraft hangar, and then the rest of it was just kind of like makeshift built additions to a warehouse, essentially.
Using his huge store of the most up-to-date intelligence, McChrystal unleashes the most dangerous weapon in JSOC's arsenal: the Special Mission Units of elite frontline soldiers. These men will also work in an entirely new way. Historically, they ran only 1 or 2 major operations per year. Now they will conduct multiple raids on a daily basis.
I can remember visiting Iraq and watching them. They didn't go out once on a night, they went out multiple times. Oftentimes the intelligence operators would go with the special forces.
It all starts by piling in the back of a striker vehicle and sitting in a very cramped space that's very hot and very dark. And then you're going through the streets, and there's all types of hazards, roadside bombs and snipers. And by the time you get to the target, you're usually already drenched in sweat, and your adrenaline's going.
You're fired up, you have your game face on, you need to be intense because intensity and momentum are critical as far as winning the day. Nervous, not really nervous.
You're jumping out of the vehicle, you're running down the street. When it gets really exciting is when you have more than one house. Oftentimes, these terrorists, they would run out of one house and jump a wall and into another house, and then you'd have to raid a second house, and then sometimes that would end up with a third or fourth house.
The critical factor is speed. Every time a militant is captured, the members of AQI around him will try to cover their tracks by reorganizing the entire network.
You had information that would perish. It was time sensitive. That sometimes needed to be run down to the ground, and maybe that would be the only chance of preventing a catastrophe or an act that would kill, a U.S. soldier or our ally.
It's a cat-and-mouse game. The terrorists constantly change their routines, abandon safe houses, and recruit new men to replace those that have been lost. But if McChrystal's people can work faster than their enemy, they will destroy AQI before it can regenerate.
You take technical information, things like stuff you get off a captured cell phone or a captured hard drive. You take detainee operation, what detainees are saying about the network they just came from, and you put them in a big hopper and say, our software, our analysis, our people have to be good enough so they can put together a picture of what that network looks like. And not only put that picture together, do it well enough so that an operator can conduct a raid within 24 hours. You're doing it for years on end with people from every agency in town. Incredible.
In a way, the most important idea that General McChrystal and JSOC brought to this whole thing was that if you hit an organization fast enough, accurately enough, and repeatedly enough, you could actually cause them to collapse.
JSOC soon develops into a well-oiled machine. Every night, 4 Black Ops task forces spread out through Iraq, performing up to a dozen raids at one time.
Go! Go, go, go!
Each group is assigned to take down targets in a different part of US-occupied territory. To the north is Task Force Red, formed from the Army's 75th Rangers Brigade. To the west, Task Force Blue, made up of US Navy SEALs. The center of Iraq will be the responsibility of Task Force Green, staffed by the US Army's most elite unit, Delta Force. These soldiers are joined by a team of elite troops from Britain's Special Air Service, the SAS, operating under the codename Task Force Black. The SAS are the pioneers in the art of black ops, such as this daring hostage rescue from the Iranian embassy in the heart of London in 1980. In particular, they are masters of surveillance and intelligence gathering.
There was undoubtedly a feeling among many of the American intelligence operators that the SAS and the other British special forces had skills that were quite unusual and quite different to the type of skills that Delta Force or the SEALs had. The American training and operational activity had all been based around, if you like, action man, leaping out of helicopters, boarding ships, all this kind of stuff, assault roles. Whereas the British Special Forces, because of their long involvement, not just in Northern Ireland, but in places like the Balkans, where they'd been involved in the hunt for war criminals, they had skills to do with the patient nurturing of targets and groups of targets. Now, that involved surveillance, it involved creativity, stealth, about how, for example, could you get a remote surveillance camera onto a balcony overlooking a target you might be interested in. They came up with all sorts of things. They drove around in Baghdad taxis, they disguised themselves. And the American intelligence people saw some of this during the early years in Baghdad, and they liked it.
McChrystal and his team work through their targets, night after night. The supply lines of foreign fighters are intercepted. Bomb makers are taken out of action. Mountains of intelligence are captured and analyzed.
They would do a raid, they would get what's called pocket litter or hard drives, you know, pieces of paper out of people's pockets. They'd come back, they'd bring it to analysts back on the base from the CIA who would go through that information. That would lead to another targeting package, and the special forces would go out again. That sort of continuous feed, continuous loop, is what made them incredibly effective.
Despite 2 years of taking al-Zarqawi's network apart, the ultimate objective, the man himself, still eludes them. But the task force is about to find a crucial breakthrough, one that could finally stop al-Zarqawi for good. Strike teams from JSOC, the US Joint Special Operations Command, are staging multiple raids across Iraq every night. This secretive organization joins together elite special forces from across the US military and its allies. They are under the command of a single leader, General Stanley McChrystal. By the start of 2006, their system of rapid-fire raids and sophisticated intelligence gathering is beginning to pull apart the terror network known as AQI. They are also getting ever closer to its feared leader, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi.
I'm going to target each discrete, tiny little element, and if I can begin to pull little elements away, suddenly the whole thing falls of its own weight.
Whenever they get close to al-Zarqawi, he seems once again to slip through their grasp. Yet, he still retains the ability to perpetrate devastating attacks, especially against so-called soft targets, like Shia mosques, killing hundreds at once. In April 2006, al-Zarqawi releases a video which, for the first time in years, shows his face.
The fact that he was a charismatic military and tactical leader led to this larger-than-life sort of myth about him. I think it fed his ego as well. He kind of began believing his own press, if you will.
You had little kids in the street, you know, pretending to be Abu Musab al-Zarqawi because he was essentially invincible.
The video urges al-Zarqawi's supporters to show no mercy against their so-called enemies, Iraq's Shia community and the US forces. Just as that video hits the airwaves, one element of the JSOC task force is preparing the latest in their long series of nightly raids. It's a team from the British SAS, operating under the codename Task Force Black. They are now concentrating on an area to the south of the capital. It is a militant heartland, and the soldiers call it the Triangle of Death.
The British Special Operations Task Force conducted a series of operations in the Triangle of Death in early 2006. And they planned an operation in April 2006, which they called Larchwood 4.
Operation Larchwood 4 is a dangerous and daring raid to arrest a mid-ranking al-Zarqawi henchman, codenamed Abu Haida. McChrystal's intelligence machine has pinpointed him to a safe house in the town of Yusufia.
We put surveillance on that safe house, and we watched it continuously for, I think, almost a month. And then one day, we see this meeting happening there. These cars converge. And so we quickly sent a raid team to go out and capture the members in that safe house.
The team know that houses like this are often well defended with heavily armed men, some wearing suicide vests. But the house could also contain a number of innocent civilians.
If they're a threat, then you engage. If they're not a threat, then you don't. You have to be able to make that decision in a snap. That's what special operations trains for. That's what they're really, really good at.
At just after 2 a.m., Task Force Black sets off in their helicopters for the target house. Following them is a support group from the British Parachute Regiment, the Paras. They will form a cordon around the house to prevent reinforcements arriving and arrest so-called squirters, targets trying to make a run for it. A short flight of just 20 minutes puts them within range of the house.
The SAS men realised it was not going to be a typical sort of mission. They thought they could hear sounds inside the building. They approached very gingerly, and to their surprise and satisfaction found that there was a door just wide open. Almost as soon as they were through the door, they were hit by a hail of bullets. These people were heavily armed, and they were prepared to fight to the death in order to prevent the SAS from getting in and taking their man.
The team quickly withdraws to a safe distance. They must decide whether or not to resume their attack.
Some of these incidents where heavy resistance was encountered, they simply pulled back and dropped a bomb on the building and killed everybody inside. For many different reasons, the SAS commander on the ground decided not to do that. They wanted this person alive for intelligence purposes. They felt it was worth trying to fight their way in, and that's what they did.
Raid compounds. The objective is to keep the opposition on the run and keep him on the defensive.
The team encounter their worst nightmare. A suicide bomber.
As one of the SAS men went up the stairs, he detonated. The SAS man was blown down the stairs. Fortunately for him, he wasn't seriously wounded. He had cuts and bruises, but of course the suicide bomber had blown himself up.
Meanwhile, outside the house, more militants join the fight. They rain fire down on the special forces.
Another man wearing a suicide vest, a squirter, fled out the back of the building and hid under a car.
The outer cordon of paratroopers enters the fight. Taking out the two militants firing from the roof, they turn their attention to the suicide bomber hiding under the car, shooting him dead before he can detonate his vest.
So at the end of a sort of terrifying 20 minutes, there were a whole lot of dead people.
Inside the house, we captured 5 senior-ranking members of Al-Qaeda.
The operation is considered another successful day at the office for Task Force Black. The main target of the raid, Abu Haida, is in custody, along with 4 other detainees. In addition, a treasure trove of intelligence is recovered from the house.
They sweep everything up they think might be of relevance. Mobile phones, computers, everything else, and they take it away. As a result of Larchwood 4 and subsequent operations that it generated, a huge amount of actionable intelligence came into JSOC's hands.
When a JSOC analyst starts to probe one of the captured computers, he discovers something extraordinary. Raw footage of al-Zarqawi himself from his recent propaganda video.
Through traces of DNA that were found on it when it was sent back to the US for analysis, they would conclude it was his laptop.
The analysts realize that al-Zarqawi must have left the house just hours before the SAS arrived.
We actually started to get excited that we were close because Zarqawi was in that house the day before we raided it. And that's when we finally had the confidence to think that we were hot on his trail.
They had narrowly missed their target, but the net is closing in fast. By the spring of 2006, the hunt for Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq, has reached a turning point. An elite assault team from the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, has secured a major breakthrough following a daring raid on a terrorist safe house.
The momentum had shifted. The raids of his network were getting faster and closer to him, and so you had the sense, we're going to get there.
As well as capturing several senior members of al-Qaeda in the raid, JSOC soldiers discover a video of enemy number one, al-Zarqawi. Hoping to tarnish his fearsome reputation, the coalition releases the full, unedited video to the media. It contains the familiar footage of the terrorist leader parading through the desert, confidently firing a machine gun. But it also shows another side to al-Zarqawi, a slightly overweight, unimpressive figure of a man.
Here's Zarqawi, the ultimate warrior, trying to shoot his machine gun. It's supposed to be automatic fire. He's shooting single shots.
No sooner does he figure out how to switch his weapon to fully automatic when it jams, and the self-styled holy warrior can't get it going again.
He looks down, can't figure it out, calls his friend to unblock the stoppage and get the weapon firing again.
He also appears to be going into battle wearing a nice pair of white trainers, hardly the image of a man threatening the might of America.
It makes you wonder.
Meanwhile, deep inside JSOC's secret detention center, the task force's interrogators get to work on their captives.
The men that we brought in, we called the Group of Five, and we knew that there were 5 important members of al-Qaeda, but we didn't know what their roles were. And they had this very unbelievable story that they were there to attend a wedding, even though there was no bride or groom, and there were suicide bombers in the house. And little by little, we would get information from one of them, and then we would take that and turn around and use it against the other 4.
One member of the group, the senior AQI operative known as Abu Haida, refuses to say anything.
He was interrogated for about 20 days. And during that time, he just maintained this story that he was just there to videotape a wedding, even though it was completely unbelievable.
For weeks, rotating teams of interrogators try psychological pressure, pleas for cooperation, subtle threats, and subtle promises. Eventually, they decide he will not talk and arrange to have him sent to Iraq's main detention facility, Abu Ghraib prison.
I decided that I would go and interrogate him one last time before he left. And I didn't really have permission to do that, but I felt that he could provide very important information towards finding Zarqawi. And that conversation started with nothing about al-Qaeda, nothing about terrorism. It just started with a friendly conversation about who he was, what was his life story, how did he come to be sitting in a chair opposite me, and getting to know each other.
Over the course of 5.5 hours, Matthew Alexander discovers Abu Haider has a fatal weakness: his arrogance. He believes he has beaten the mighty American machine and should be recognized for it. Alexander obliges him.
I would constantly stroke his ego, constantly make him believe in this fallacy that in his head, that he was a very important man, that he could affect the future of Iraq. And then in the last 15 minutes, what I did was essentially offer him a deal. I offered him the chance to work with us instead of Al-Qaeda in a secret program that didn't exist, in which he could be a person who could influence the future of Iraq. And he decided to work with me.
Over the next few weeks, Alexander visits Abu Haider in his cell at night and coaxes more and more information out of him about al-Zarqawi's whereabouts, all on the pretext of proving his worth for the non-existent secret program.
I said, "You're so close to getting this program. All we need is that one last piece of information that'll convince my bosses." And he said every month Zarqawi would meet with his spiritual advisor, who was our detainee's best friend.
It's the piece of intelligence that everyone has been waiting for. For years, al-Zarqawi has been a ghost, striking with impunity. Now, at last, JSOC has what it needs to find him and take him out.
The intelligence and military effort that had been put together was beginning to close the noose around his neck. We knew that Zarqawi had a spiritual advisor. We knew that he was going to visit him. It was just a matter of being patient.
Using this information, JSOC quickly traces the spiritual advisor and begins following him day and night. Using high-tech systems like Predator drones, as well as old-fashioned undercover operatives, they create what McChrystal calls the unblinking eye. Their target is never out of sight. Abu Haider tells Alexander that if they want to find al-Zarqawi, they need to look for one particular sign.
We would know when he was going to meet with Zarqawi because he would change cars from a white car to a blue car. And whenever he got in this blue car, that meant he was going to meet Zarqawi.
Once again, it was a joint US-UK surveillance on a building in Baghdad. And lo and behold, they realized by following his movements that every few days this man got into his car. They used Predator and other methods to follow his car as it went up the road to this place in the palm groves near Tikrit, where indeed Abu Musab al-Zarqawi himself was hiding.
By now, pictures from the drone are being fed live to JSOC's command center. Everyone, including General McChrystal himself, is watching in silence as al-Zarqawi's spiritual advisor gets out of the car. Then, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi himself appears.
Once the blue car arrived at the house, helicopters took off immediately to go to that house and capture Zarqawi. And it was about 20 minutes away.
A discussion is held in the command center. Is it worth trying to capture al-Zarqawi alive in broad daylight? Is it better to wait until nightfall and take him when he's asleep? If they strike now, they risk a heavy firefight and numerous casualties. Worse, al-Zarqawi is a master of the last-minute escape. If they wait, he could easily slip through the net again. This could be their one and only chance to finish the job.
And there was a period of time in which we were just waiting. I was watching it live on a video, and we were just waiting.
McChrystal believes there is no time to lose. He can't even wait 20 minutes for the assault force to arrive by helicopter. He opts for another plan, designed to take al-Zarqawi completely by surprise. He calls up 2 F-16 fighters patrolling nearby.
We were expecting to watch the helicopters land in the raid, which we typically would watch. And instead, after about maybe a 5-minute wait, the house just exploded.
They knew he was in the building, and they made the decision without losing any time to prosecute the target. So they didn't even feel there was time to get one of their special ops task forces in the air to go and raid the building. They simply decided to hit it with bombs from an F-16, which is what they did.
Just minutes after the bombing, special forces arrive at the house. Incredibly, they find al-Zarqawi still alive in the wreckage.
A soldier grabbed him, and then Zarqawi died. And it was sort of a sweet justice, if you will, that Zarqawi's last image was a U.S. soldier grabbing him.
The day following the raid, the U.S. announces to the world that they have their man at last.
Good morning. Now Zarqawi has met his end, and this violent man will never murder again.
Pictures are released of his dead body as grim confirmation.
Zarqawi could be responsible for upwards of almost 100,000 deaths by starting the civil war in Iraq. And so I don't think the world's going to miss him.
It's a devastating blow to al-Qaeda in Iraq. The man who was thought to be invincible is dead. But the work is not over. With the intelligence that was collected from the smoldering remains of al-Zarqawi's compound, another series of raids is launched. And AQI starts to fall like a stack of dominoes.
There was, a good deal of chaos inside the organization. And what you do is, when you're targeting Zarqawi, you're also collecting intelligence on the network. And so what that allows you to do is the minute he's dead, they're far more vulnerable, the people around him, than they realize.
Killing him undoubtedly had an impact. There was a lot of exploitation from the raid. A lot of material was recovered. And we can see that little by little, through 2006, through to the early part of 2007, they did successfully take them down. So Zarqawi, if you like, was evidence of a bigger strategy that was really getting seriously effective by that point. And certainly by the summer of 2007, al-Qaeda in Iraq had largely been smashed.
And so you do a series of raids that is devastating, and they never really came back from his death.
Today, the Joint Special Operations Command is the group of special forces operators that is tasked with planning and executing dangerous and secretive missions for the United States. The black ops it conducts have continued to strike at the heart of al-Qaeda and other terror groups around the world. In 2011, it was JSOC that planned and executed the mission to take down the world's most wanted man, Osama Bin Laden.
You have to win. And at the end of the day, when the heat is on, you're going to do whatever it takes to win.
A hostile country is trying to build a nuclear bomb. Behind the plot is a mastermind focused on the destruction of Israel.
General Mohammed Suleiman hated Israelis, hated the state of Israel.
It will take 3 elite Black Ops units to deal with this menace. Special forces operating deep within enemy territory to confirm the threat.
That was an extremely risky intel gathering mission. If there was a mistake made, that could have been war.
An elite flying unit to take it out.
They destroyed their target, they exited, they lost nothing.
And finally, an assassination unit to deal with the man behind the threat.
3 of them came as scuba divers to his beach house, shot him, and then disappeared.
This is the top secret story of the Israeli strike against Syria. North Korea, 2004. Deep inside this secretive communist state, a train travels through a remote northern town. Then suddenly,
in April of 2004, there was a massive train explosion in northern North Korea.
The explosion is so enormous, it registers magnitude 3.6, equivalent to a small earthquake.
It killed several hundred people, destroyed a town of 10,000 people, left 2,000 people wounded.
According to the North Korean government, the train was carrying liquefied petroleum. But before anyone can discover anything more, the regime forbids further reporting on the incident.
A week later, they banned all use of cell phones in North Korea for 5 years.
Just what is going on in the rogue nuclear state? 5,000 miles away, one nation is following the incident with great interest. Meir Dagan is Israel's top spy, the chief of the Israeli intelligence agency, Mossad.
Meir Dagan was a legendary figure in the Israeli security establishment. He had a reputation for being very brutal in what he was prepared to do in pursuit of Israel's national security interest.
North Korea behaving secretly is nothing new. But what intrigues Dagan are intelligence reports that a Syrian aircraft has now landed in North Korea. Contact between North Korea and the Arab world is unusual and highly concerning to Israel.
And that was when the Israelis started to take a closer interest in what was going on.
The plane is supposed to be delivering aid, but instead it seems it is being loaded with the bodies of victims of the crash. More than that, the bodies are being transported in lead-lined coffins and are carried by men wearing chemical weapons suits. This is extremely strange. Then Dagan is informed that the bodies in the lead coffins are not North Koreans, but Syrian scientists.
There were 12 Syrian scientists from something called the Syrian Scientific Research Center, their covert military research and acquisition center.
It raises a terrifying possibility for Dagan. Could North Korea be helping Syria to build a nuclear weapon? Dagan has to find out more. It becomes a top priority for Mossad and will eventually lead to one of the most extraordinary black ops of all time. Two years later, a woman walks into a London hotel bar. Her arrival is noticed by a man who has been drinking alone. But this is no innocent meeting. The man is a high-ranking Syrian nuclear official traveling to London alone.
He comes to London, residing in a posh hotel. He has a meeting tomorrow morning in London, but he has the night or the evening to spend. He goes to the bar of the hotel, and extremely happy that in the bar he meets a woman with a wonderful character.
But what the Syrian doesn't know is that he is under surveillance. Mossad had been alerted to the Syrian's visit when he checked into a hotel under a false name.
The Israelis dispatched teams of people to monitor him.
Unaware he is being watched, the Syrian continues to flirt with the woman.
And she's also impressed by him. He orders another drink and another drink, and he's confident that he has a wonderful way of spending the night.
But he is also unaware that the woman is not as she seems.
He doesn't know that this woman is a part of the Mossad crew, and she was there to keep him busy while her team is breaking into his hotel room.
The Mossad agents are members of the Neviat unit, experts in covert bugging.
The team specialized in breaking into hotel rooms.
It takes barely seconds for the Neviat team to override the hotel room's security. Once inside, they realize they have hit the jackpot. The Syrian official has left his laptop completely unguarded. Immediately, they go to work.
The Mossad was able to break in, get its hands on the laptop computer, and copy its contents off the hard drive.
The agents transfer the entire contents of the computer hard drive to Mossad HQ in Tel Aviv instantaneously.
They took all the information from the computer, and then they put devices on the computer to monitor any future activity from that computer.
As they leave the room, the female Mossad agent abandons the hapless Syrian. Within 15 minutes, Dagan and his analysts are looking at the files in Tel Aviv.
And they open it. They find a lot of different details and documents.
What they found on his computer was really rather extraordinary.
On one folder, they found JPEGs that looked very odd.
Appearing on the screens in front of Dagan are hundreds of photos documenting the construction of a large industrial facility.
It was clear that this is an unknown facility, a huge one.
The building they saw was quite large, 130 feet by 130 feet by 70 feet tall.
Initially, the building resembles a treehouse on stilts, with pipes leading to a pumping station. Later photos show modifications, and eventually the entire complex is hidden beneath a huge roof. Initially, Dagan is unsure of what the facility might be. But then it begins to dawn on him what the images are showing. He sees large industrial equipment inside the facility. It is an exact replica of something Dagan has seen before in intelligence images from North Korea.
They showed that it was almost an exact replica of the Yongbyon nuclear weapons facility in North Korea.
It was exactly the same reactor. The two were perfectly matched.
Dagan is in no doubt as to what they have uncovered.
The evidence was overwhelming.
North Korea was building a nuclear reactor in Syria.
Further evidence from the laptop confirms it.
There were blueprints of the nuclear power plant. There were pictures of the nuclear power plant.
The Israelis even had photographs of Syrians and North Korean nuclear experts together.
It is Israel's nightmare scenario, a hostile nuclear power on its own doorstep.
It was a nuclear reactor that can be used only for military purpose.
Whoever is building this has only one purpose: to assemble a nuclear bomb.
Dagan is now certain there is a nuclear weapons program in Syria, but he has no idea where it is. Intent on finding out, he orders Israeli satellites to monitor potential sites. Eventually, they close in on a remote area of Syria called Al-Kibar, where some highly unusual communications have been monitored.
They intercepted a very unusual spike of telephone communications from this location at Al-Kibar, which is in the middle of nowhere in the desert, to Pyongyang, North Korea.
It was very far from the capital, Damascus. It was in a remote part of northeastern Syria, but not far from the Euphrates River and the border with Iraq.
Israeli satellites now pinpoint a large building at Al-Kibar. When they compare them with the stolen images from the Syrian laptop, it is a perfect match. Al-Kibar has to be the site of Syria's nuclear weapons program. Armed with the intel on the Syrian facility, Dagan goes to see the Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert.
Mayor Dagan came to see Prime Minister Olmert and told him this dramatic news that Syria is in an advanced stage of developing nuclear weapons.
The Israeli Prime Minister immediately recognizes the seriousness of the threat.
Olmert said one thing right at the start, and that was the Syrian nuclear weapons program is simply intolerable for Israel. It cannot be permitted. This is an existential threat to Israel. This reactor has to go away.
The only way to be rid of the nuclear weapons program is to blow up the reactor. But first, he has a series of questions for Dagan. Most importantly, how far advanced is the reactor? If it is already operational, then a bombing could cause a catastrophe.
If the reactor is already active, then a full destruction of the reactor might cause an enormous environmental pollution poisoning.
But Dagan does not yet know if the reactor is fully operational.
The JPEGs were 15 months old, so this facility must be more advanced.
They desperately need to find out how advanced the construction is. That means doing something extremely risky. Sending someone in to take a look.
The next step would have to be risking the lives of operatives.
Olmert has only one group of men capable of operating undetected hundreds of miles within enemy territory. So he calls upon Israel's elite Black Ops unit. In English, they are known as the unit. In Hebrew, they are the Sayeret Matkal.
Sayeret Matkal is the highest elite commando unit of the Israeli army.
Sayeret Matkal in Israel is nothing short of legendary or mythical. It's essentially the top unit in the army. Their job is to go on special operations that are considered beyond the scope of your regular troops.
It's a unit modeled after the British SAS. SEAL teams are similar to it, Delta Force is similar to it. They're some of the most highly trained units in the world.
The Sayeret Matkal has one particular specialism: operating covertly behind enemy lines.
The expertise of Sayeret Matkal is to infiltrate enemy countries in silent intelligence gathering operations.
They've gone into Jordan, they've gone into Lebanon, they've done missions in and out of these countries undetected.
Whilst never officially admitted, it seems that on an overcast night in midsummer, the selected commandos prepare to set out on their mission. They head deep behind enemy lines to confirm the existence of the Syrian nuclear weapons program.
The Israelis have been very secretive about how they got there, but certainly they are very adept at using low-flying, almost silent helicopters.
It is understood they boarded two Sikorsky CH-53C Stallion helicopters to travel at low altitude and cross the border into Syria. On such missions, the pilots have to negotiate the terrain using night vision goggles. As an extra precaution, some of the commandos are disguised as Syrian soldiers. The commandos are dropped a safe distance from the facility.
Israelis were able to get on the ground within about a mile of this mystery building in northeastern Syria.
As the commandos set off, they know that no matter what, the Syrians must not be alerted to their presence. Once the helicopters are gone, if the Syrians discover them, there is no chance of being rescued.
But that was an extremely risky intel gathering mission. If there was a mistake made and they were compromised, that could have been war.
The Sayeret Matkal commandos come within meters of the Al-Kibar facility and immediately start intelligence gathering.
The unit did their intel collection on the ground, right at the site. That was extremely dangerous.
Israeli commandos dressed as Syrian soldiers went and took pictures of the facility.
Of course, they took photographs, but also took soil samples.
Collecting soil and water samples from around the facility is the most important element of the mission. It is the only way Israel can find out for sure if the reactor is operational.
If the reactor is active, then a very small portion, not lethal, but very, very small portion of radioactive substance would be found in the water.
Once the intel collection is complete, the commandos hide their tracks and prepare to depart. But then,
they were almost caught. They left the scene in the very last minute.
the commandos remain undetected. And the mission complete, they return to Israel with the soil and water samples. In a government laboratory in Tel Aviv, the samples are tested for nuclear contamination. The results of the exhaustive tests are delivered to Olmert and Dagan. The soil and water samples collected by the Sayeret Matkal commandos do contain traces of nuclear contamination, but crucially, not at levels that indicate the reactor is fully operational.
The samples prove that the reactor is still inactive.
This is critical news. It means Olmert can now give the order to take it out. Olmert calls a meeting of Israel's top military and intelligence chiefs. They are all agreed on one thing.
However this reactor got started and whenever it got started, The end is clear. The reactor is intolerable. We're not going to allow it, and it's going to go away.
The only question is how to destroy it. The first option is to send the Sayeret Matkal back in.
Perhaps sending in soldiers, again a Sayeret Matkal commando team, to attack on the ground, hoping that in secret you could get enough Israeli commandos and explosives to the scene to blow up the building.
They know that they can get people to the site, but there are problems with this tactic.
If you have to deploy special forces, it's a huge operation, very dangerous operation. They have to penetrate the site. They have to bring a lot of explosive.
Above all, they can't be sure that a commando operation will pack enough firepower.
Frankly, the Israeli military had doubts about that.
You have a very large reactor built of reinforced concrete and steel. You can't send 5 guys in there, with backpacks full of explosives. There's not enough explosives.
Olmert's only option is to strike from the air.
It looked like using the Israeli Air Force would be smarter.
Air power has an advantage. It can come like a light, it's very speedy. It can do the job with a lot of ordnance and disengage before the enemy understands what happened. So if you have to choose between the two alternatives, usually the airstrike is much more efficient and less risky.
The Prime Minister gives the order to prepare for an aerial assault on the Syrian reactor. It will be known as Operation Orchard. And for it to succeed, Olmert alerts another of Israel's Special Forces units. Squadron 69, known as the Hapatashim, the Hamas Squadron. There is no squadron better suited for a mission to destroy an enemy nuclear program. That's because they've done it before. "25 years earlier, 8 Hapatashim pilots flew into Iraq to bomb a nuclear facility being built by Saddam Hussein.
I was a fighter pilot, a major, a deputy squadron commander, who prepared himself to destroy the nuclear reactor.
Evading Iraqi air defenses, they take out the facility in a clinical strike.
The whole operation from takeoff to the attack was 1 hour, 43 minutes and 30 seconds.
But a quarter century later, an attack on Syria is a much harder prospect.
The Israeli Air Force says they can make something look easy, but it's never easy. Even to fly to a target in Syria, you don't just fly right across the border.
For decades, Syria has been developing one of the most formidable anti-aircraft defense systems in the world. They have installed the Russian-built Tor M1 air defense system and have multiple surface-to-air missile batteries ready to repel any air attack.
Nothing is easy when it comes to attacking a country that has anti-aircraft systems, and so the Israelis worked hard on their countermeasures.
The Hapatashim has aircraft specifically designed to evade such air defenses. The US-made F-15 and F-16 fighter bombers.
The F-16 is well equipped to cope with a lock-on of a missile battery. We can break the lock. We can use some ECM, flares against guided missiles, and some electronic warfare against the same batteries.
They also carry electronic countermeasures that can fool the Syrian air defense system and allow the attacking craft to enter Syrian airspace undetected. In the meantime, the Hapatashim pilots begin flying practice missions. To be successful, their bombs must hit a precise target point so that they will penetrate the building and explode from within. They practice steep-angle dive bombing runs on a tiny target. It is more than just practice. Watching them is General Eliezer Shkedi, head of the Israeli Air Force. He is looking to identify the very best pilots in the squadron, as Israel will only be able to send a limited number of aircraft into Syria.
If you bring too many airplanes, the chances that you will be discovered is bigger. We've done a lot of simulations and calculation. What is the optimum number that is making sure that the reactor will be destroyed?
A date has yet to be decided for Operation Orchard. But then Prime Minister Olmert receives intelligence that forces his hand. Mossad has detected activity on the Syrian coast.
North Korean ships were arriving at the port of Tartus in Syria.
These ships are carrying the final materials the Syrians need for the Al-Kibar reactor to become fully operational. Olmert has to act now. At exactly 23:59, 10 Hapatashim pilots are ordered to take off. Even now, they have no idea what their target is.
There were two sets of planes that took off around midnight in early September.
The F-16s and F-15s take off 20 seconds apart, armed with 500-pound AGM-65 bombs. They head out to sea at nearly 600 miles an hour and follow a route designed to avoid detection by Syrian air defenses.
What the Israeli Air Force did was map a route that would take planes to the west over the Mediterranean, then north, then east over Turkish airspace.
Israel's Prime Minister and senior military commanders gather in the Israeli Air Force's underground command center, known as the Pit. Here they monitor the route of the fighter bombers. Once it is established that there are no technical faults with any of the planes, 3 of the F-15s are ordered to return home. The remaining 7 continue on the planned route at low altitude.
They flew up the Mediterranean and then on the east, on the Syrian-Turkish border.
It is only now that the pilots are told that this is a live mission, and they are flying into heavily defended Syrian airspace. These elite pilots are trained to suppress nerves.
As a fighter pilot, develop some mechanism and techniques how to depress the fear. I'm not telling you that there is no fear. If somebody will tell you he is not afraid, he is lying to you. It is always there. It is always with you. The fact that you can be killed.
The planes approach Syrian airspace. It is now that they will encounter the Syrian air defense systems.
The military side of the operation involved somehow evading the Syrian radar so as not to alert the Syrians to their presence.
Using codes allegedly sold to them by Russia, the Israelis are able to make the Syrian air defenses suddenly display hundreds of enemy planes. Then just as suddenly, the Syrian system detects no enemy planes at all. To the Syrians, it appears like a brief technical glitch.
So the Israelis actually made the Syrian system think that everything was normal, as though the radar screens were absolutely fine, but the Israeli planes were invisible. The Syrians didn't even know they were under attack.
Now in enemy airspace, they move on to the next stage. Precise coordinates of the Al-Kibar complex are sent to the Israeli pilots' onboard computers, and the planes swing south to begin their bombing run.
This is the risky time. This is where your breathing become much more in a high pulse.
It is no longer about technology. Now the human element takes over.
At the end of the day, as a pilot, you have to find the target yourself, and the aiming, nobody can help you in aiming and finding the target.
But as the pilots focus on the target, they are at their most vulnerable.
You have 1 minute that you are exposed to everybody, and you are not defending yourself because you are concentrating on aiming on the target. This is the 1 minute that the most difficult of the flight.
As they begin their bombing run, the pilots suddenly detect anti-aircraft rockets. Back in the pit in Tel Aviv, they have no idea what is going on. Has the target been hit? Have the pilots been shot down? Then comes a radio transmission. It is the single word, Arizona. Arizona. The code word that confirms the bombs have found their target. Not a single Israeli plane has been lost, and the reactor has been totally destroyed.
There was nothing left, really, but a smoking ruin at the reactor.
The most dangerous part of the mission is over.
When you release the bombs, you are much lighter now. You can maneuver much stronger, and you go back to a low level, and then you start to relax.
The pilots exit Syrian airspace at high speed. The mission is a complete success.
They destroyed their target, they exited, they lost nothing.
Olmert immediately telephones the White House to tell President Bush that something that never existed doesn't exist anymore. Now there is a tense wait for the Syrian response. Olmert is confident that the Syrians dare not react, but he cannot be certain. Immediately after the raid, he had sent a message to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, saying that Israel would not publicly take credit for the raid.
They calculated that if they didn't make too much noise about it, didn't claim responsibility for it, didn't boast about it, then it might be in Assad's best interest simply to ignore it.
Olmert's gamble is that Assad has no desire to draw attention to Syria's illegal nuclear weapons program, or to be publicly humiliated.
The purpose was not to push President Assad of Syria with his back to the wall in this ego-derived scene of the Middle East.
Sure enough, the gamble pays off. Syrian state news announces that Israeli planes had been repelled from Syrian airspace. It is a lie, but both countries are content to pretend that the bombing never happened. It seems Olmert has successfully safeguarded Israel's future. But one thing still bothers Olmert and Dagan. How had Syria managed to develop a nuclear weapons program in complete secrecy?
For 7 years, Israel didn't know about the #1 project that the Syrians were engaged with. Now, a nuclear reactor is not something that it's easy to hide. It's a huge facility.
So Mossad begins investigating how Syria has managed to keep the Al-Kibar facility a secret. What they uncover is that Syrians had developed a networking system that avoided all electronic communications.
They took a flight back in time. They said, let's, in the most sensitive issues, let's not use any sort of electronic transmission. Every time we want to send a message, we will print a hard copy, put it in an envelope, seal it with wax, write top secret, and build a network of couriers that would take these envelopes from place to place.
And at the heart of this communication system is a man renowned for his hatred of Israel and one of the most powerful men in Syria, General Mohammed Suleiman.
Mohammed Suleiman was the most powerful, closest advisor to the current leader of Syria, Assad.
His office was just across the hall from the office of the president in the presidential palace in Damascus.
Because of his closeness to the president, Suleiman is known as Assad's shadow. This is the mastermind behind Syria's top-secret nuclear program.
Suleiman, he had credit for the compartmentalization within the Syrian government that allowed him to undertake this project for years. And no one knows about it.
But Mossad have uncovered some even more worrying intelligence.
The intelligence was that Suleiman had not gotten the message. After the destruction of the nuclear power plant, the Israelis received intelligence that the Syrians were resuming their efforts to build another nuclear power plant.
The Syrians may have to start from scratch, but with Suleiman in charge, it seems that the Syrian nuclear weapons program could soon be up and running again.
You know, technically, when you destroy a nuclear program, within 5 years, the countries that have done it can do it again. If you have enough money, enough determination and know-how, and you start from zero your nuclear program, in 5 years you can have the bomb.
The Israelis conclude that so long as Suleiman is in charge, they remain under threat.
He and his talented bureaucratic and organizational capabilities are still around. So, what do you do?
For Israel, there seems no other option. They have to kill him. But taking out Suleiman will be a far harder task than striking at a static building in the desert. The Syrian general is an incredibly cautious man. His movements are a closely guarded secret, known to only a few. In Damascus, he is under armed guard. Getting to him there will be impossible. But in midsummer 2008, Mossad discovered that Suleiman is planning to spend a weekend at his second home, a villa in the Syrian coastal city of Tartus. Security in Tartus is far more relaxed. If they're going to kill the general, this is the time and place to do it. But it will require another of Israel's Black Ops units to carry it out. This group are called the Kidon.
Kidon means bayonet. They were known within the Mossad for assassinations, but also knew how to slip in and out of countries.
Among even their enemies, they are respected as extremely talented and well-trained in the operations theater.
The Kidon is the most secretive of all Israel's elite units, and almost no operational details of their missions have ever been released by any Israeli government. They are notorious for one specialist activity: assassinating Israel's enemies, wherever they may be. When Canadian weapons expert Gerald Bull was found to be working with Saddam Hussein, he soon met with an untimely end. This was widely regarded to be the work of the Kidon.
They also have taken out dozens of Iranian scientists, dozens of North Korean scientists and engineers, dozens of Syrian scientists and engineers.
There is no unit in Israel better suited to conducting a high-level assassination abroad than the Kidon. This is the unit that many believe are charged with planning the assassination of General Mohammed Suleiman. It seems, as the Kidon study Suleiman's villa, they realize that although well guarded from the street, from the sea, the rear of the villa is totally exposed. The Israelis then discover that when staying at his villa, Suleiman hosts his guests on the balcony overlooking the sea. Initially, they consider bringing a boat close enough to shore for a sniper to target Suleiman from the boat. But it seems this plan is rejected. They will only have one chance, and a long-range shot from a moving boat is just too risky.
The further out the shot, the harder it is to get a headshot. When you're taking a shot from a boat of a guy on land, it's a little bit of a harder mission.
The only other option is to send someone onto shore. A yacht sails up the Mediterranean coast towards Tartus. It is registered to a wealthy businessman, but today the crew are said to be carrying 2 Kidon snipers.
They sent in one of their intelligence assassination teams in a ship off the coast of Tartus, off the coast of Syria.
Around a kilometer off the coast, the yacht drops its sails, and the assassins make their way to shore.
Snipers from the ship came as scuba divers to his beach house.
At the same time, General Suleiman arrives at his weekend home. As the sun sets, it seems the snipers emerge from the water. They watch the guests as they mingle on the terrace. They know that their dark figures are invisible to anyone from above, but they still cannot see Suleiman. Eventually, Suleiman appears.
He was having dinner at his country home along the sea. His friends and family were sitting around the dinner table.
As the general entertains his guests, the 2 snipers line him up in their crosshairs. They get ready to take the shot. But then, their target is obscured. They move to a new position. The 2 snipers relocate and aim their rifles. They have earpieces in, which can hear an electronic countdown. This will ensure they fire simultaneously.
It was a difficult shot, but they did shoot until he was down, and the mission was over, and they got away with it.
Both bullets had found their target. One in the head, one in the neck. Like the bombing of the reactor, Israel will never officially admit to the assassination of General Suleiman.
The Israelis do not talk publicly about killing people overseas because it's actually against the rules. But they do say things, including in this incident, they referred to it as a very happy accident. That was actually an official statement.
Taking out the threat of a Syrian nuclear weapons program has been an extraordinary accomplishment, calling upon 3 elite special forces units. The Sayeret Matkal to identify the threat, the Hapatashim to take it out, and the Kidon to ensure that it cannot return. Thanks to these operations, a dangerous and volatile regime has been stopped from acquiring the most dangerous of all weapons of mass destruction. The importance of that has only been made more evident since 2011, when Syria began its descent into a vicious civil war. A deadly group of terrorists has set up a base deep inside Iraq. They have been cooking up chemical weapons and need to be taken out. So an elite special forces unit, the Green Berets, are sent in.
It's something I think every SF guy aspires to. You want to be at the very tip of the spear, be the front element.
They have to work with a group of local guerrilla fighters.
We were like, oh, wow, all right, now it's on. We got some hardened fighters.
In challenging, mountainous terrain.
They knew this was going to be a very difficult fight.
This is the inside story of Operation Viking Hammer, how a small group of men defy the odds in pursuit of one of the most important counter-terrorism missions of the Iraq War. It's the first hours of Operation Iraqi Freedom. In Baghdad, Saddam Hussein's regime is being hit with a devastating shock and awe bombardment. The Iraqi capital is pummeled for hours by multi-million-dollar high-tech weaponry. What few Americans realize is their military planners are also targeting a different problem that is hundreds of miles to the north. It is in a mountainous area known as Iraqi Kurdistan, close to the Iranian border. The enemy are not Saddam's soldiers, but a hardcore group of Islamist terrorists. Ansar al-Islam, the Fighters of Islam. They have close links to the most wanted terrorist network in the world, Al-Qaeda. responsible for some of the most notorious atrocities of recent times.
They suspected that they had major al-Qaeda connections, that there were a range of foreign jihadists.
Among its 800 members are battle-hardened veterans of the war in Afghanistan.
They were well armed with RPGs and mortars and machine guns, the Soviet-style and Iranian and Iraqi weaponry.
It is also rumored they have a chemical weapons lab, manufacturing ricin, a poison made from castor beans. The problem facing the US military is the terrorists are deep inside enemy territory.
Ansar al-Islam was nested in an area called the Halabja Salient in the eastern part of Iraq, right on the border with Iran.
They were along the mountainous ridgeline that formed the Iraqi border with Iran. They dominated the key terrain in that area.
It's time to call in a unit that's skilled in operating behind enemy lines and which is perfect for this mission, the Green Berets.
Their entire mission and operation revolves around the conduct of unconventional warfare.
Based in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the Green Berets were set up over 60 years ago.
The Green Berets were officially established in June of 1952.
They first came to prominence in the Vietnam War.
They were increased greatly in size during the Vietnam War and sent there to do a number of missions.
Like many special forces, they are highly trained and multi-skilled. They are able to use a variety of deadly weapons systems. Entry requirements are rigorous.
They must be airborne qualified, so they have to go to airborne school. And then they go through a very arduous selection process for the special forces. The great majority of those applicants do not make it through the training.
What makes the Green Berets different to other special forces is that they are specialists in fighting alongside local troops, deep behind enemy lines.
The Green Berets are the Army's unconventional warfare experts. They are trained to work with host nation or indigenous forces.
The Green Berets have to have all of the technical soldiering skills, but they're also expected to be experts in the languages, cultures, and politics of the regions that they go to. They're expected to act as diplomats to engage with the people on the ground.
The aim is that the Green Berets mentor local indigenous forces and supplement their firepower with American know-how. This is what's known as force multiplication.
The force multiply aspect there really are two parts. One is the ability to organize, train, motivate, and lead these indigenous forces, and also to bring in and employ the different larger weapon systems, air operations, close air support, those kind of things that are available.
If there is one man perfect for the mission against Ansar al-Islam, it's Lieutenant Colonel Ken Tovo. He typifies the Green Berets. He's a highly experienced operator and commander of the Green Berets' 3rd Battalion.
Ken Tovo is a very polished individual. He really did personify kind of the diplomat warrior.
He is the man chosen to lead what will become known as Operation Viking Hammer. What makes Tovo especially valuable is that he has previous experience of Kurdistan from the 1991 Gulf War. Tovo has already identified which local force he will work with. Tovo's aim is to harness the firepower of thousands of local fighters. The Kurdish guerrilla forces known as the Peshmerga. The Kurds are a different ethnic group from Iraqi Arabs. The Peshmerga have been fighting a war of resistance against Saddam Hussein for years. They occupy a small enclave in northern Iraq. Since the first Gulf War, it is protected by a no-fly zone enforced by American and Allied jets.
The partners in this case were the PUK, or the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, was the Kurdish entity and the Kurdish armed forces that Tovo was partnering with. And the job of Operation Viking Hammer and their Kurdish Peshmerga partners was to go down this valley into this mountainous area and root out Ansar al-Islam.
Tovo's plan is that a small group of Green Berets will lead the Kurdish attack. They will operate in small, flexible teams of up to 12 men, called ODAs, Operational Detachments Alpha, or A-teams. One team is chosen to spearhead the whole operation. ODA 081. It is led by Brian Rowan, a young captain at the time.
My role during the mission was the detachment commander. Operation Viking Hammer was my first deployment, my first combat deployment as a Special Forces team leader. I had just graduated the qualification course about a year prior and was assigned to ODA 081 as the team leader.
Alongside him are a number of veteran NCOs.
I had a great group of NCOs. They were all very much more experienced than I. They're all senior sergeants with years and years of experience.
Among them is Senior Sergeant Grit.
He was about 7 years older than me, about 36 at the time, I believe. He had a lot of experience, really brought a sense of competency to the team. And then you had the specialties. I had 2 weapons sergeants, both incredibly skilled snipers, both sergeants first class, both very competent, medical sergeant, and an engineering sergeant.
The communications man is Blake Kramer.
I was the senior communications sergeant. Most people would probably look at being shot at as not being okay. It was something that was expected, and I was okay with it.
But first, Tovo and his Green Berets arrange to meet the PUK leadership. They have to win them over if Operation Viking Hammer is to have any chance of success. Within hours of arriving in northern Iraq, Ken Tovo and his Green Berets travel to the PUK headquarters in the town of Halabja.
We were focused on linking up with our partners, the PUK, specifically the Peshmerga leadership. We were excited. We were part of that lead element. Getting in there and getting to be one of the first onto the ground was something I think every SF guy aspires to.
The Kurds have a long history of opposing Saddam Hussein. In 1988, he infamously gassed the Kurdish population of Halabja, the town where Tovo is heading to meet the Kurdish leaders. More recently, Halabja and the Kurdish outposts have been the victim of suicide bombings and regular mortar attacks from the Ansar al-Islam positions. So the CIA has been trying to make sure the Americans will be welcomed with open arms by the locals. For 12 months, the agency has sent bundles of cash and what it calls lethal aid, guns and ammunition. But when Tovo meets the Kurds, he finds they will need persuading.
So they met up in Halabja and began to plan how they were going to take on Ansar al-Islam.
The first problem Tovo faces is cultural. The Kurds are a warrior people. Their name, Peshmerga, means he who faces death. The Kurds sport moustaches and view any clean-shaven outsider as an inexperienced child, while the Americans must maintain strict grooming standards at all times.
There really was a warrior culture within the Kurdish people. Most young men felt compelled to do their duty fighting and would enlist or join for periods of time in the Peshmerga. It really is a badge of honor in that culture.
The Kurds have even deeper reasons to distrust the Americans. Ten years earlier, after the First Gulf War, the Kurds rose up in revolution and had expected America to send troops to help them. But they didn't. Instead, Saddam Hussein led a ruthless fight back, slaughtering the Peshmerga and thousands of civilians. For their part, the Americans view the Peshmerga with similar caution. They are not professional soldiers and lack military discipline compared to the Americans. For Brian Rowan, the first impressions are not great.
They're not what you would expect from an American soldier perspective. They're typically, wearing baggy clothes. I think we call them MC Hammer pants. Tennis shoes, maybe an AK-47 or some other weapon they were able to get. A big bushy mustache, almost invariably, and then a head wrap. They didn't have radios. Maybe they'd have a little handheld or a cell phone, and that was it.
Both sides must win each other's respect. The Green Berets have a plan that will show the Kurds that they mean business. Ken Tovo will do it all with a simple click of a mouse. On the night of the 21st of March 2003, Tovo and his team head towards a lookout near the terrorists' mountain base. The Green Berets and the Kurds take up position. The laptop and SATCOMs are set up. Mysterious numbers are typed in. The Kurds then wait an anxious 15 minutes for something to happen.
The Special Forces group provided the targets, provided the coordinates.
So you're sitting there, you're watching, you know that the missiles have been launched, you're waiting, and all of a sudden you hear this. And they fly over, and then just one after another. And you just hear them all flying right over your head, which is amazing and a little bit terrifying at the same time. You just hope that one doesn't fall short. But these things all fly over and they hit.
They just watched as the night sky lit up.
It was cool.
The first Tomahawk missiles flatten the base, killing several terrorists. In just a few minutes, American technology and air power wins the Kurds' respect.
I think that our resolve was a little in question. But at that point, definitely, when the Tomahawk started coming in, they definitely knew we were there, we were going to be by their sides, and it wasn't just all talk.
However, the missiles cause a new problem. The Ansar fighters retreat from their positions. They know they cannot take on the Tomahawks, so they simply pull back.
As soon as the missiles began to impact, the teams could see the AAI loading up on trucks, abandoning their positions.
They were smart enough to get out of them and move away.
They had a series of defensive positions that they were able to fall back to.
The Ansar fighters move back to other defensive positions around the nearby village of Sargat. There, they start to dig in.
Sargat was the main stronghold of Ansar al-Islam. It was down in the valley, but it was ringed by mountains.
The terrorists have built trench systems and bunkers in the hills and mountains overlooking the area.
It's very, very mountainous, very rocky, little vegetation in the area, very few accessible road networks.
The Ansar terrorists are well supplied with heavy weapons. These include heavy-caliber Russian machine guns called dushkas, as well as mortars and heavy cannon. It looks like they're determined to fight to the death. A ground assault could be a bloodbath. This is something that concerns the Kurdish leader, Jalal Talabani. He suddenly decides to pull out of the whole operation.
Talabani got cold feet right before they launched this attack, and Tovo left to go visit him at his headquarters.
With the operation in the balance, Ken Tovo and the Green Berets have to explain how they will do it and avoid Kurdish casualties. He uses a detailed terrain model to outline every aspect and talk through the risks and the battle plan. The Green Berets will work closely with a force of 7,000 Peshmerga. Because the enemy occupy multiple positions, each covering the other, the Green Berets and Kurds have to strike in a simultaneous, multi-pronged attack. So he puts forward a plan to spread the Green Berets between the Peshmerga to coordinate the attack. The Green Berets use cards to plot out exactly how the mission will work. The plan is that 6 different prongs will move through the area. Each prong has a color: black, orange, red, and so on. Yellow prong will be the main thrust moving along the valley floor.
Yellow prong was the main effort that was going straight up the valley into Gulp and then on to Sargat.
Green prong will clear the ridgelines overlooking the valley.
The green prong was going to split off and go up on the high ground, up on the mountain ridge, and their role was to provide cover for the force proceeding down the valley floor into Sargat.
With the entire mission in doubt, all eyes are on the Kurdish leader, Jalal Talabani, as he takes it all in.
Tovo reassured him that they had done all of the reconnaissance, that they were prepared to fight in an effective way. So Talabani said, okay, I believe you, I trust you, go ahead and launch the attack.
Six Green Beret ODAs will be involved in the attack. But the task of spearheading it falls to ODA 081. It's a nervous time for Sergeant Blake Kramer.
I remember not getting much sleep at all the night prior. Just had, tons of things running through my mind, all the what ifs, all the contingencies.
Despite having only 10 men in his team, Captain Rowan divides them between the main Yellow Prong, whose objective is the village of Sargat, and Green Prong, who are heading into the hills.
We actually split the team, where 6 of us went with the Yellow Prong, and 3 went with the Green Prong. And that's pretty typical for an ODA. You're designed, again, to be able to cope with uncertain situations. Because you're essentially like a multi-tool, you can reconfigure as necessary, and you bring to bear all the skills you need.
Brian Rowan will have with him 2 important Kurds, a general, Sheikh Jaffa, in charge of the Peshmerga, and the son of the PUK leader, Bafol Talabani, who will act as their interpreter. On the 28th of March, everyone is set. For some of the Green Berets, it's the first time they have met the Kurdish Peshmerga fighters. Many of the Americans have changed their appearance and grown moustaches to blend in and gain more respect from their Kurdish allies.
We met on the battlefield that morning. You look up and there's 7,000 Peshmerga and all the Special Forces guys standing around waiting to mass up and link up with our elements.
It's also the first chance for the Green Berets to comprehend the task ahead.
When the sun comes up and you see the mountains with snow and just the sheer magnitude of them, it makes you realize just what a dangerous place you're about to go into.
The terrain was just very steep, rocky mountains with a little bit of green scrub on it. You had the snow, you had the ice melt. It was very muddy, slippery.
And that really brought out the reality of how tough this was going to be, particularly given that their positions, the Ansar Islam positions, were in depth going up the mountain. So anything we were doing was going to be attacking uphill in mountainous terrain that was incredibly rugged and cold.
Before the column moves off, Ken Tovo heads back to the command center to coordinate the operation from there. The operation is so complex that radio communication is the only way that Tovo and his officers can keep track of all the different prongs. They must keep in regular contact with all the Green Berets to monitor their positions and avoid friendly fire accidents, so-called blue-on-blue casualties. Once the teams are in position and away from danger, he gets stuck in by ordering a preliminary bombardment by jets and fighter bombers to soften up the Ansar positions. The ground assault column moves off, and the Green Berets head towards Sargat with the Peshmerga. The main thrust, Yellow Prong, must first capture a village called Gulp.
The town of Gulp was a small little checkpoint area that was at the foot of the valley.
But the enemy are waiting.
As the Kurdish force started moving up the hill into Gulp, they came under some pretty heavy fire.
You could hear the guns firing, and then you would see a little bit of rounds impacting around. You would hear some bullets whizzing by. it started getting a little bit more intense, more accurate. It was enough to get you on your toes and realize that you were in the game.
In my particular prong, I had a general called Sheikh Jafar. And he was the one who was giving the orders to the Kurds.
The Kurds suddenly stop.
Sheikh Jafar basically says, you know, what are we going to do? You saw all the Kurdish force literally squat down and stop.
The Peshmerga had come under fire from the Ansar al-Islam forces and stopped cold in their tracks.
This is not good. We need to maintain the momentum. We need to, you know, keep moving forward. How are we going to do this?
To turn the situation around, Captain Rowan calls on backup and summons an airstrike.
They got on the radio, they called for help, and a Navy F-18 replied with 500-pound JDAMs.
That was probably the sweetest sound we had ever heard.
You could just tell, it just sent this wave of euphoria or confidence that they had, you know, this huge force behind them.
That was enough to rally the Peshmerga. They pushed on into Gulp.
Inside Gulp, the Peshmerga fight house to house to clear it. It is now that the local forces impress the Green Berets. The Kurdish fighters are armed only with AK-47s and a few magazines of ammunition. But their bravery is astonishing.
There was a guy, a Kurd, assaulting with a cane. You know, he'd sling his weapon, he'd grab his cane, and he'd get to the next rock wall, he'd lay down, he'd turn and look at me and give me a thumbs up, lay there, unsling his AK-47, roll back over, and start shooting.
Compared to the Green Berets, their tactics are simple. They're always on the attack, never pausing so as not to lose momentum. If a Kurd is wounded, he is expected to make his own way to medical treatment. The Peshmerga soon overrun and capture Gulp. It has taken just over an hour, but Objective 1 has been secured. With the mission running ahead of schedule, the Kurds hold a team talk.
Sheikh Jafar pulled them all in and talked to them about how they had done very well fighting this far, and essentially gave them this motivational speech, you know, talking through about the importance of fighting bravely, living up to their heritage. We're known as warriors. This is our chance to fight with our American brethren.
But the Green Berets soon realize that Gulp is the easy bit. They are about to enter the hornet's nest, Sargat.
I think that's when it really hit me. We had the translator with us, and he was letting us know what Sheikh Jafar was talking to him about in Kurdish. And it was really hitting home with me that we are getting ready to enter the crux of the battle.
The Green Berets move on again. But the problem at Sargat is the terrain. Ansar al-Islam holds the high ground.
They were shooting down, it was almost like shooting down in the fish in a barrel. It was the absolute worst place and the wrong place to be.
It was a horseshoe shape, And all along that top of the horseshoe was sporadic fighting position that were heavily dug in and fortified, and they were mutually supporting. And then they all had some type of crew-served weapon, mortar tube, or some type of heavy gun that could rain down fire on us.
And all of a sudden, we started taking a whole lot of fire. Heavy fire. And when you hear the Dishkas and the PKM rounds hit and the mud that was around us is just this thickening thwack, 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 thwack. And it starts hitting all around us.
We were within range of countless targets or countless positions, and it was just, it was unreal.
This time, Captain Rowan can't summon an airstrike. Calling in air support risks blowing up his own men and his Kurdish allies. The Green Berets will have to seize control and fight their way out.
They were going to have to deal with this problem themselves.
Captain Rowan comes up with a plan.
The snipers that I had with me, the weapons sergeant, he immediately started putting precision fire on some of the positions.
The weapons sergeants use an M82 Barrett 50 cal. A heavy long-range sniper rifle that can take out a target nearly 2 kilometers away. Using the rifle, they pick off the enemy one man at a time. Thanks to the snipers, the Green Berets can move on. Next stop is the village of Sargat. The fighting is even more intense.
The battle for Sargat was extremely ferocious.
It was enough for us to know that we didn't need to stay there. These weren't rounds that were flying well over our head. They were within feet.
Just tracer fire and bullets hitting all around on the road, rocks disintegrating from bullet fire impacts. We could hear them start launching mortars at us.
Captain Rowan wound up in the front of the force as they entered Sargat.
With Rowan and his men bogged down, Grit and another weapons sergeant decide they need more firepower. So they grab the heavy machine gun.
Fortunately, in the truck, we had with us still our 50 cal heavy machine gun. So the team sergeant and some of the other sergeants were able to get that out.
They had to get a good sight line against the Ansar al-Islam positions. 50 caliber machine gun, very heavy weapon. Fired about 700 rounds to neutralize one of the main positions that was firing down on them.
Meanwhile, Blake Kramer is laying down suppressing fire with a light machine gun.
We just opened up with a machine gun, shooting at different enemy targets and positions, trying to kind of generate that camaraderie, and hey, I'm in it with you, and let's do this. Combined with the 50 and our machine gun, we were able to rally those guys up and start moving into the valley.
The Green Berets also get the Kurds to bring up their own heavy guns.
They had one flatbed truck that had a dual-barreled 23mm gun on it. This thing was huge. And the truck would drive up and kind of park sideways. They'd shoot the gun, and the truck would rock way back as they'd shoot this thing. It's incredibly inaccurate, but scary as heck.
Now, back in the village of Sargat, Captain Rowan leads from the front.
Captain Rowan, meanwhile, was down on the ground, literally leading the charge. He later found out that he'd forgotten to put the back plate in his armored vest. So he was really kind of a sitting duck.
It was a miracle that we didn't get hit. We've got gunfire mortars all around us. And I look over at our interpreter that was with us, and he's on his cell phone. And he's calling back, talking to, I believe it was his cousin, and he was letting him know that we were in it. Are you serious? Are you on the phone right now? Get off the phone. We're in the middle of all this. I thought that was quite comical at the time.
These soldiers fought incredibly valiantly. The Americans are really out there, outgunned, and having to fight from the low ground to the high ground.
Finally, after 4 hours, they enter Sargat. As they search the village, the Americans find passports from foreign fighters from Sudan, Yemen, Oman, and Saudi Arabia.
After we went in, we identified, there was chemical suits, there were some atropine injectors, other things that were a bit unusual.
Critically, the Americans also find some evidence of chemical weapons manufacture. Residues of ricin, the poison made from castor beans.
They found a number of other indications that Ansar al-Islam had actually been trying to develop some chemical weapons capability there.
It is the first serious evidence anywhere in Iraq of a link between al-Qaeda and weapons of mass destruction. The US forces orchestrate a press conference and tell the world all about the raid and the incriminating evidence they have found. But no mention is made of the role the Green Berets played in the discovery.
At that time, no one knew what a ferocious battle had been waged up the valley to get to Sargat. So this full story of the battle only came out years later.
Now the Peshmerga and Special Forces A-teams are functioning well. They have earned each other's respect. The guerrillas also know that their partners, in their heavily armed pickups, are a formidable unit.
And morale is pretty high, because now they're in Sargat. This is the home of Ansar al-Islam.
The battle seems almost over. So for now, the Kurds and Green Berets halt their advance as darkness falls. However, the remnants of the Ansar fighters withdraw again. Their destination? The caves above Sargat. Here, they plan to lay a trap for the Americans and the Peshmerga. They will use the caves as fortified bunkers. As dawn breaks, the Ansar al-Islam fighters settle into their positions in and around the caves.
The next morning, we continued on with our push. There were huge cave complexes. I mean, there was just multiple caves.
As they approach, the Green Berets come under fire.
We received some gunfire back, and we were like, "Oh wow! All right, now it's on." Again, we got some hardened fighters. We've been firing fully automatic into these caves, and we couldn't drive these guys out, and they were continually shooting at us.
The Green Berets and their allies become pinned down. Realizing they have to do something, they come up with a plan to flush the enemy out of their stronghold.
We just secured the front of the cave, made sure nobody could get out. And sent one guy back for an anti-tank round. Put it into action, and we backed off from the cave a little bit. We just collapsed it in.
"70 Ansar fighters are killed that day. The last diehards are taken down. Three days after the operation began, the Green Berets watched the final stragglers of Ansar al-Islam retreat across the border into Iran. The terrorists have been neutralized. Ansar al-Islam is defeated, for now at least. Only a handful survive the onslaught. With their heavy weapons lost, and their infrastructure and ricin lab dealt a death blow, there is little left of the threat first targeted days earlier. After just 8 days of intense action in Kurdistan, the Green Berets have completed their counter-terrorism mission.
In the end, ODA 081 was awarded 3 Silver Stars and 6 Bronze Stars. And this was, without doubt, the most ferocious battle the Special Forces had fought since Vietnam.
In the next few days, they link up with other forces and target Iraqi units in northern Iraq. In early April, the city of Kirkuk falls to Tovo's men. The conventional Iraqi units there didn't even put up a fight. In conjunction with other American forces, northern Iraq is secured, and the way is opened for tanks to move into Baghdad 3 weeks after hostilities began. 2 years later, the PUK leader who worked with Tovo, Jalal Talabani, is elected the first Kurdish president of Iraq. Operation Viking Hammer will go down as a classic Green Berets operation.
Viking Hammer could be looked at as a textbook application of the training.
At its heart was the doctrine of persuading local forces to fight alongside small American teams, bringing in devastating air power, and fighting deep behind the lines.
To fight a battle uphill in a mountainous area with indigenous forces as your main body, you come out of that with no casualties and very, very few problems is a remarkable achievement.
I think the operation overall was a success in many ways. We took absolutely no casualties for U.S.
And for the small, close-knit teams fighting in the northern sector of Iraq, they may not have received as much media coverage, but it's still a source of immense pride.
I was just fortunate to be a part of it, and every guy on that team played a huge, huge part of that day.
It's something I'll never, ever forget. And moments like that, when you've got 5 other guys on your left or right flank, I couldn't have been blessed with a better group of men to have the fortune to lead during combat.
Operation Viking Hammer was really the opening act of many incredible battles that the Special Forces fought, not only in 2003, but for the next 10 years. They have really been engaged in numerous incredible firefights and battles. So what you have now is the U.S. Army Special Operations Forces are absolutely the most battle-tested force in U.S. history.
A group of heavily armed terrorists storm an embassy compound. It quickly becomes a siege.
These were man-eaters. They were used to killing.
The attackers have captured senior politicians, generals, and a host of VIPs. They will hold them for over 100 days. For the Special Forces, a frontal assault is impossible. Instead, they must do something radical. Attack from underground.
It was never going to be anything but a military solution.
At stake are the lives of 72 hostages. This is the extraordinary story of how Peruvian commandos ended one of the longest terrorist sieges in history. In the capital of Peru's upmarket diplomatic quarter, there's only one place to be seen: the Japanese ambassador's residence. 450 guests are sipping champagne and making small talk.
It was a big diplomatic bash.
All are prominent people from Peru's political landscape.
Lots of guests.
Among them are diplomats, businessmen, and members of the Peruvian president's family. As well as this man, Admiral Luis Giampietri, a senior figure in Peru's intelligence services.
There were a lot of army and police, so there were a lot of fancy uniforms and there was a lot of gold braid.
British journalist Sally Bowen is also there.
There's a great deal of whiskey being grabbed off trays from waiters as they went around.
The most senior person is Francisco Tudela.
When I was foreign minister, I had to go and pay my respects because it was the birthday of the emperor, Japan's national day.
The building is a fortress, well protected, with blast-proof doors and windows. A 12-foot-high wall surrounds the complex. A ring of policemen and sentries protect entrances and exits. Security is the last thing on their minds. But a small team of terrorists are preparing a bold mission. They plan to sneak through the security cordon hidden in the back of an ambulance. As the guests tuck into their wine and canapes, little do they know what's in store. At 8:30 p.m., the heavily armed terrorists place a charge on the outer wall.
Suddenly there was an explosion.
It sounded a little like a car bomb. kind of materialized in our midst. We couldn't really understand what was going on.
They were very well equipped. 4 of them had Uzi machine guns, Browning pistols, hand grenades.
The terrorists opened fire on the guards outside the building. Guests dive for cover.
It was just firing all around.
There was gunfire both from outside the residence, and some of the gunmen arrived in our midst.
Of course, I was trying to protect my wife, and why not say the truth, protect myself.
I hit the ground. The shooting intensified. Various people had run underneath the tables. It was very scary.
As soon as the gunfire subsides, the terrorists turn on their captives.
They were very hard on us. They kicked us, they aimed their guns at us, and they pistol whipped us.
In Lima, news reaches the most powerful man in the land. Peru's president, Alberto Fujimori. 450 people are under the control of 14 terrorists. Fujimori has based his whole career on defeating terrorism.
This was 1996, and in theory, Peru was pacified. This is what Fujimori had been telling everybody for a long time, for some 3 years.
Between 1980 and 1990, an estimated 35,000 people had been killed in Peru's bloody anti-terror wars, particularly against the notorious Shining Path.
The terrorism initiated by the Shining Path in the 1980s and 1990s was a threat to our country. It endangered our very existence. They were on the verge of taking power.
For a man elected because he could defeat terrorism, this incident spells political disaster. The attack on a Japanese target also has a special resonance. Fujimori is of Japanese descent.
The Japanese were targeted because they were seen to have been giving help and support and a lot of financial assistance to Fujimori and the regime.
But at this stage, Alberto Fujimori doesn't know how to respond. He desperately needs more information. For a start, who are the terrorists and what do they want? At the Japanese ambassador's residence, military hostages rip off their insignia and rank and desperately attempt to hide their identity. Outside, the authorities try to shoot their way in again.
Gunfire went on for 20-25 minutes.
They lob in tear gas. But the rebels have come prepared.
So they took out their gas masks and put them on, and they were fine.
The tear gas subsides.
The rebel with the megaphone started shouting that he wanted the Japanese ambassador to stand up and identify himself. And I think I, and certainly some people around me, were quite nervous at that point because we had a horrible feeling that the ambassador was going to be executed in front of our eyes.
The Japanese ambassador, Morihisa Aoki, is forced to get on a megaphone. He pleads with the police to fall back, and a tense calm follows. In Alberto Fujimori's operations room, the president begins to appraise the situation. He calls for a trusted aide, Vladimiro Montesinos, head of Peru's National Intelligence Service, or NIS. A trained lawyer, he once defended Fujimori in court against charges of corruption. Now, he's his right-hand man, the president's Mr. Fix-It.
We all were very much aware of the existence of Vladimiro Montesinos, but he was never ever seen. He wielded extraordinary power. He was Fujimori's eyes and ears.
Montesinos calls upon an elite counter-terrorist unit, the Peruvian Commandos.
The Peruvian commandos are always training for any threat to the nation.
Para cualquier contingencia que pudiera presentársele a la nación, ¿no?
Close quarter battle, intelligence gathering, and heliborne assault are just some of their skills.
Parachuting, amphibious warfare, mountain warfare, hostage rescue, storming buildings, as well as marksmanship.
General Jose Williams Zapata and Luis Alatrista Rodriguez soon receive a call from Montesinos.
I was working in the 1st Special Forces Brigade. The television showed us what was happening at the Japanese ambassador's residence. We could see that there was a considerable problem. My reaction was to order my officers and men to get ready for action.
Montesinos and the commandos begin to discuss the options.
We rejected the possibility of an air attack using parachutists, hang gliders, or other forms of approach because we would lose the element of surprise, the secrecy. That wasn't possible.
Generals Williams Zapata and Alatrista Rodriguez will have to find another way. Meanwhile, at the ambassador's residence, the rebels are digging in. They place booby traps in doorways and around the grounds. They turn the building into a fortress. Only now do they reveal their identities.
One of the rebels, who was quite close to me, picked up a loud hailer and shouted, "Keep your heads down or they'll be blown off." This is the MRTA.
The MRTA, the Tupac Amaru Revolutionary Movement, are hardline communist rebels, infamous in Peru.
The MRTA was specialized in kidnapping. They were ruthless and had killed a lot of people.
They kidnapped several businessmen to extort money from their families. They also carried out assassinations.
The terrorist commanding the raid is also the group's leader, Nestor Serpa Catalini. Born in Lima in the 1950s, Serpa is a former political radical who has taken up arms.
He was a psychopath. He was a very bloodthirsty guy.
Serpa's hope is that seizing the hostages will bring the movement publicity. He identifies the English journalist Sally Bowen as someone who could be useful to him.
He was very calm and collected. He was in a small study off the hallway of the residence. We asked him what he was about, what he was doing this for, and he immediately came out with the demand that MRTA political prisoners had to be freed.
Serpa demands the release of 400 political prisoners, including his own lover, and he demands a great deal of money.
They asked for a ransom of $6 million and the wholesale change of the country's economic model. They were blackmailing the government.
Serpa also wants to meet the president. If his demands aren't met, he'll kill hostages. The first person in his sights is Foreign Minister Francisco Tudela.
The leader told me that they were going to kill me the next day at 12 o'clock.
Tudela has just 14 hours to live.
I told my wife, I'm a dead man. And she said, don't talk nonsense. But I said, yes, the odds are against me. I was a major target for the terrorists.
Luckily, one of the hostages steps in. Michel Minig is a negotiator from the Red Cross with experience of various war zones.
I think he probably felt that the ambassador might need some support. I was very relieved to see Michel Minig get up.
Very quickly, Minig persuades the captors to release some hostages.
And I think he did an amazing job that night. Michel made it clear to Serpa, the rebel commander, that he would do his cause a lot of good if he broadly respected the rules of warfare.
Minig secures the release of the waiters, and then the women and children, in all 170 people. Among them, the wife of Foreign Minister Francisco Tudela.
She didn't want to leave me. And I said, you have to go. Think of the children. I had small children at the time. And so she reluctantly left the room, but it was very emotional. It was very difficult.
Sally Bowen is also one of those released.
We shook hands, and then he said, good evening. So out we went and left the residence. When the door opened, suddenly there was this battery of cameras and people shouting and asking questions.
Sally Bowen is given the task of announcing to the world's press the MRTA leader's demands. Other hostages make it clear that any attempt to storm the building would be insane. The next day, Fujimori begins a series of meetings with his cabinet. He is adamant that no MRTA prisoners will be released.
Imagine for 1 second that the government had ceded to their demands. The next day, we would have had another group, like Shining Path, that would have done a similar thing. That would have been unthinkable.
Fujimori makes it clear he will never negotiate with a gun to his head. For Francisco Tudela, Fujimori's stance is a death sentence. He is due to be executed at noon. His life hangs in the balance. The deadline comes. Serpa does nothing. But he warns Tudela that he is living on borrowed time.
He said to me, you know, Foreign Minister, I admire your work, but I have to kill you.
In fact, a few hours later, 4 more hostages are released by Serpa, all of them diplomats. Meanwhile, preparations to retake the ambassador's residence are continuing. Thanks to the released hostages, the commandos are getting valuable intelligence. They learn of the enemy's strength and positions.
We knew there were 14 terrorists, that they had all come in with heavy weapons, they had rocket-propelled grenades. They had prepared for this operation and they knew exactly what to bring.
They study a scale model of the complex, looking for a way in. A frontal attack is out of the question. The only way forward is to do something truly radical.
Approaching from above ground was immensely challenging because of the explosives. So that's how we came to the idea of approaching from below, by tunnels, from below ground.
Operation Chavindawanta is born. The name refers to a Peruvian archaeological site known for its network of tunnels. The plan is to dig into the compound at a depth of 3 meters. Nothing like this has ever been attempted before. The main tunnel will be 20 meters long, with other tunnels feeding outwards. It will take at least a month to dig from the nearby buildings to reach the objective. They can't use heavy machinery, as the sound could tip off the terrorists. The largest tools will be electric pickaxes. Over the coming days, the operation begins. For now, though, Serpa Cartolini seems to be enjoying himself. In late December, as a gesture of seasonal goodwill, he releases more people, 225 in all, in the hope of grabbing the headlines.
For a long time, one felt that the guerrillas were winning the propaganda war. They seemed to be more open and ready to talk than the Peruvian government. There was absolute hermetic silence from the Peruvian government.
Whilst the authorities keep their cards close to their chest, the terrorists revel in all their newfound fame.
They had a very good sense for publicity. They knew that photographers and camera people needed images. The MRTA would hang banners out of the window periodically. It was all part of the propaganda war.
15 days into the siege, on New Year's Day 1997, the MRTA pull off an astonishing propaganda coup.
There was the famous incident when we finally managed to get permission for some of the photographers and camera people to file past the residence, so at least they could get some images of the exterior. The front door opened and Serpa invited everybody in. So they all went in and had their photo opportunities with the guerrillas.
I spoke to the foreign press when they came into the embassy on New Year's Day. He tried to sell this idea that they were fair combatants, that they were guerrillas that respected the Geneva Conventions.
Despite appearing to be reasonable, the siege drags on. For those unlucky enough to remain inside, life settles into a strange routine. Mostly boredom is the biggest enemy. Hostages take turns to give talks on different subjects. Some run the corridors to keep fit. Others do chores, like cleaning.
First comes surprise, fear, anguish, and anger. But then there comes a moment when you start to assimilate it all and you learn to live with it. And all you want is for it to end, one way or the other.
At night, the hostages have to sleep on the floor. It is cold, cramped, airless.
It's hard to sleep in this way. We found it hard to get used to it.
For Admiral Giampietri, nighttime is a chance to reflect.
It was a chance to be alone with your thoughts. There was silence. You could reconstruct the events of the day.
Occasionally, the terrorists show their true colors. Something Francisco Tudela experiences.
You had two terrorists by your side, pointing their guns at your head. They pulled the trigger. You hear clack, the empty chamber. And that's a moment in which you have a mixture of fear and relief.
"4 weeks in, 72 hostages remain inside. But with none of Serpa's demands met, the siege is stuck in stalemate. For the terrorist leader, the lack of progress is unsettling. The stress starts to get to him.
He had sharp changes in his mood. He became overexcited and violent. And then, after a few hours, he would lie down and sleep. Then he would wake up and feel anguish, put his hands in his face, go to a window to breathe, and then the cycle would begin again and he would become again violent.
It is also a troubling time for President Alberto Fujimori. Outwardly, he too seems to be making little progress. So he tries something new. Troop carriers and heavy guns are brought in, and loud music is played around the embassy. It's a well-known trick of psychological warfare, designed to shred the nerves of those inside.
This was one of the greatest tortures for us. The noise was extraordinary. We couldn't talk amongst ourselves because the noise was so loud.
But all this has a reason: to conceal the digging.
Se colocó música.
Loud music was played with the aim of distracting the terrorists.
Estuvieran distraídos en ello.
When we were nearby, we made noise, put music on, so they couldn't hear the work that was going on underground.
As a further distraction, Fujimori seems to be stepping up the action on the diplomatic front.
There was Fujimori dashing off on missions to negotiate possible asylum.
His team of negotiators liaises daily with the hostage takers.
Without doubt, none of us wanted a military operation. We preferred a solution that would allow us to get out alive.
Fujimori travels to London to see if Britain will give the MRTA asylum.
The whole situation was very confused. There seemed to be activity on a different range of levels.
But this diplomatic front is a ploy to hide what's really going on. The digging is nearing the target. And anyone who knows Fujimori is in no doubt as to his real intentions.
I knew my government, I knew President Fujimori. It was not only a decision of President Fujimori, it was a decision of a country that had suffered during more than a decade of horrendous terrorist attacks.
All the while, underground, the miners are moving ever closer to their objective. It is just a matter of time. In April, almost 4 months into the siege, Serpa makes a concession to break the deadlock. He drops the number of MRTA prisoners he wants released from 400 to just 20. By now, it's nearing summer. The temperature outside hits 26 degrees. For the captors and their hostages inside, the long siege starts to take its toll. The Peruvian authorities have turned off the water and electricity. Conditions are getting rank.
Off. No running water, no electricity, no hygiene.
With the water turned off, the toilets back up.
The bathrooms soon broke down. Many people had loose bowels. The smell was overpowering.
But the awful conditions are part of the army plan. It forces the terrorists to rely on supplies from the outside.
This was deliberate, to control the flow of supplies into the building.
The only source of provisions and fresh water is the Red Cross, which makes regular deliveries to those inside.
So the members of the International Red Cross would ferry food in and out every day. So they went in and out of the residence on a daily basis.
What nobody knows, not even the Red Cross, is that the aid packages contain something else. The authorities have hidden high-tech gadgetry in the deliveries. And they are intended for one man, Admiral Luis Giampietri. Amongst the board games, religious artifacts, books, and even musical instruments are tiny microphones and cameras. Specialist technicians from Peru's intelligence services have custom-built tiny eavesdropping devices.
The intelligence service provided microphones that were being smuggled in, concealed in different objects, in a guitar, in some books, the provisions. In this way, they could listen to information, get it down on paper, and then pass it to us so that we could put it to use.
Some of the listening devices are no bigger than a match. The cameras are also minute and contain tiny transmitters. Over the weeks of the siege, an amazing 800 microphones are smuggled in. Admiral Luis Giampietri secretly places them around the residence with the help of others. The microphones aren't just for eavesdropping. They also allow him to communicate with the commandos.
Talking into the microphones was not easy. Maintaining secrecy from all the other hostages was also very difficult. But I had to keep it secret because I didn't know if they agreed with what I was doing.
To conceal what he's doing, he is sent a Bible with a hidden microphone. He starts to read aloud from the pages. The MRTA soon dismiss it as the prayers of a madman. But within each prayer, Giampietri drops in key pieces of intelligence.
We knew that he was ex-Naval Special Forces. He spoke our language. He knew commando terminology. And he was our best contact amongst the hostages.
In their situation room, the commandos listen in as key intelligence is gathered from all the different microphones. Gradually, they start to build up a detailed picture of what is going on.
We listened
to the terrorists as well, so we gained more information which would allow us to improve our operation to rescue the hostages.
They learn that at night the rebels are especially vigilant. This is when they most fear an attack. Some sleep amongst the hostages, whilst others rotate guard duties. Giampietri's intelligence also reveals one crucial piece of information. Every afternoon, 4 members of the group play a game of football. The large dining room on the ground floor becomes their pitch. Whenever the rebels play, many of their comrades watch on. This is when they are at their most distracted and vulnerable.
So, if they were all together playing football downstairs in the dining room, we could take them out in one go.
The afternoon football game is clearly the moment to strike. So the commanders adjust their plan. They dig a special tunnel straight under the dining room.
We decided to make a branch from the main tunnel to under the residence where they played football.
In this new tunnel, the commandos will place something special.
From this arose the idea of placing explosives underneath the hall and the dining room, with the intention of taking the majority of the terrorists out. This way, they would have less chance to kill the hostages.
Even if the dining room bomb doesn't kill many terrorists, it will at least achieve something else.
As a secondary objective, obviously an explosion of this nature under a house would create such confusion that they would be disorientated and incapable of reacting.
As 0 hour approaches, the commandos now finalize their plan.
There were to be 2 assault squads. For the ground floor, Team Alpha. For the first floor, Delta Squad.
The group that would do the raid includes Miguel Velez Moras Rojas.
Yo fui integrante del Grupo Delta.
I was part of Group Delta. My section leader was Commander Renan, and I was the 5th man in that team.
Quinto hombre de ese equipo.
150 soldiers rehearse over and over using a life-size replica of the complex. They practice different room-clearing tactics and test different types of explosives.
We tested the exact amount needed. Not too much that it blew up the residents and the hostages. Not too little that it had no effect.
They're nearly ready. Then there's a complication.
The journalists who were virtually living on the rooftops around the embassy became aware that there was a lot of noise from underneath the ground. So we all learned that tunnels were being dug.
Serpa flies into a rage. He threatens the hostages and gathers them all upstairs so they can be killed more quickly in the event of a raid. He breaks off negotiations entirely. What he doesn't realize is that he has just played into Fujimori's hands. By refusing to negotiate and refusing to guarantee the health of the hostages, Serpa has given Fujimori the excuse to act.
The decision was made to carry out the raid and rescue the hostages.
The commandos are finally ready. The tunnels have been dug. Late in April, 126 days since the siege began, the commandos are given the green light.
It was around 3 in the afternoon, a still warm Lima summer afternoon.
A message is sent to Luis Giampietri to make sure the hostages are wearing light-colored clothing. This will differentiate them from the terrorists in their dark combat fatigues. Giampietri instructs them to lie on the floor and keep their heads down. Francisco Tudela is one of the few who knows what is about to unfold.
I was one of the 5 people who knew of the communications between Admiral Giampietri and the military. And so I knew when the attack was coming.
As the rebels start their afternoon game of football, Admiral Giampietri whispers into his Bible as if praying. He tells the commandos that the guards are distracted. He also transmits the confirmation that he has got all the hostages to wear light clothing. A team is sent to set the charge under the dining room. Just after 3 p.m.,
we made our way in via the main tunnel.
The commandos suddenly emerge.
After months of inaction, bursts of gunfire and smoke appearing from the top of the residence. All this was being transmitted by TV cameras, so it was live on television immediately.
As planned, one force, Alpha, storms downstairs, while the other, Delta, hits the upper floor and seeks out the hostages.
The Delta group was in charge of the second floor, and they entered around the whole perimeter as well. We entered the residence in 6 places at once.
A second wave of commandos attacks the front of the building, while another scales the walls on ladders. More blasts signal the arrival of more elite soldiers as Delta Team assaults the upper floor from the terrace.
They started to evacuate in an orderly fashion.
Bangs, gunfire, hostages scurrying down flights of stairs on the outside, keeping their heads down.
With many of the hostages safe, the commandos move in for the kill. Over the next 15 minutes, they flush out the terrorists. But it's still not over for Francisco Tudela, who remains trapped in his hiding place. One of the terrorists comes looking for him.
The terrorist that was my executor, he looked for me in the room and then saw me in the terrace. He threw a hand grenade. And I received 60 pieces of shrapnel. I still have 18. Then he shot me. He failed the first 2 times, but the third time he got me in the leg.
Despite his wounds, Tudela manages to escape.
I recall one stretcher being carried out. I think we almost immediately identified Francisco Tudela, who'd been shot.
I remember that Admiral Giampietri, when he reached that point in the garden, saw me and said, "You are wounded." And I said, "No, we are free." I was exhilarated.
As the smoke clears, all 14 terrorists are dead, including Serpa. Only one hostage doesn't make it out alive. He is wounded and dies from a heart attack. 2 commandos are killed. The whole raid lasts 32 minutes from beginning to end. For President Alberto Fujimori, it is a triumph. In the final act of showmanship, he visits the building. He supervises the removal of the MRTA flags and congratulates his commandos.
This is Fujimori at his most ebullient, having taken a huge gamble and having it come off.
The raid is seen as a great victory. However, if Fujimori and Montesinos thought the raid would make them politically invincible, they were mistaken. Both are now in jail on corruption charges. Nevertheless, the raid remains a source of pride for those who took part.
Every commando aspires to take part in this sort of event. For me, it is a matter of personal pride. We did it for Peru, and I will always be proud to have led this group of men. All Peruvians feel proud of this operation because it was a success, the most successful rescue mission in the world.
The raid sends the message: Peru won't tolerate terrorism.
You should never negotiate with terrorists or give in to their demands. Because of the success of the Chavinto Huántar operation, the Tupac Amaru revolutionary movement was effectively defeated.
Today, Peru is largely free of terrorism and is reaping the benefits, thanks in part to the work of the commandos.
Thank you to Conflict of Nations World War III for sponsoring this video. Remember, you can play right now for free, but if you download from our link in the description within the next 30 days, you can claim your free gift of 13,000 gold as well as 1 month premium subscription. The war room is waiting. See if you have what it takes to lead your country to victory.